was really an accomplishment because he's trying.
In today's classrooms, teachers across the country are facing an increasingly diverse population of students. Students are coming to school with a wide array of interests, cultural backgrounds, academic readiness, and learning styles. If all students are to succeed, educators need to find instructional approaches that will allow them to respond to the individual needs of each student. Such an approach is that of differentiated instruction. In differentiated classrooms, teachers know that in spite of this diversity, all students share the same basic needs for safety, belonging, achievement, freedom, and fun. These teachers also know that students seek to satisfy these needs in different ways and at different times. Paying attention to students' needs, responding to them in appropriate ways, and accepting each and every student unconditionally provides an approach to education in which every student can succeed. One of the foremost experts in differentiation is Dr. Carol Ann Tomlinson, author and professor of education at the University of Virginia's Curry School of Education. Dr. Tomlinson has written numerous books and articles on the subject of differentiation and regularly presents at conferences worldwide. Recently, Dr. Tomlinson led a 3-day Best Practices Institute in Differentiation for teachers on the campus of the University of Virginia. With these videos, you will be a virtual participant in this institute that focuses on the basic, non-negotiable elements of differentiation. As a virtual participant in the institute, you will also attend breakout sessions led by educators experienced in the classroom application of differentiation. In these sessions, you will learn how to use anchor activities and cubing to differentiate your lessons. You'll see how to use online primary resources to individualize your instruction. And you will learn how to use digital storytelling to capitalize on your students' personal interests. In this first video, Dr. Tomlinson will introduce the concept of differentiation and explain how it is a proactive approach to planning for the unpredictability of today's diverse classrooms. And now, Dr. Tomlinson.
We're really glad to have you here. It's such a treat for us to see returning people come back, and a real treat for us to meet new folks, and always a great pleasure to have folks who present for us come back. A lot of these people have been working with us now for years, and so it's sort of like a family reunion. We don't get to see them except at Institute time, and they come back and we have a chance to talk at least for a little bit. We have some wonderful presenters for you and some wonderful sessions. How many of you are sort of at the front door of differentiation? You're here to explore, you know a little bit about it, but you're not really quite comfortable launching in your classroom. Let me see your hands. Okay. How many of you are down the pike somewhere? You do this every once in a while. You get the point and are really trying to implement it. You're just not quite finished yet. Let me see your hands. Okay. And this last category doesn't mean you walk on water. I've been working with this stuff for a really lot of years, and I'm just astounded at how much more I find out all the time and how much more there is to learn. But the last category is people who are at least confident enough to lead some other people or model for other people. You kind of get the game plan, and your classroom probably is a differentiated classroom if you're a teacher. Let me see your hands. Excellent. Okay, we have a pretty good spread of folks there then. My goal for you for the next 3 mornings, with just an hour and a half each, which is a very short amount of time, is to give you the big picture of differentiation, so that when you go to sessions later in the day, or when you read or when you discuss with each other, you have the big picture as opposed to just little pieces. One of the things that happens a lot with me, and I'm sure this is true with you in the areas that you spend your life obsessing about, I find a lot of really interesting concepts about what differentiation is. I've seen things where people have written stuff that would suggest that as long as you are doing tiered assignments, you're differentiating instruction. That's just a tiny little pinpoint of the whole thing. I've seen conversations where people will say, boy, if you just get your curriculum right, you know, and then you poke in some differentiation, you're home free. And that's a bigger thing than just a tiered lesson, but it's missing so many pieces that a classroom has to have to be able to work. So what I want to try to do is to share with you that big picture. What are sort of the non-negotiables that everything else kind of plugs into? And to do that, it seems like it might not be a bad idea if we started off by trying to land on some common ground about what differentiation might actually mean. And clearly there's not just one appropriate definition for that, but let's look for a few minutes to see to what degree we're sort of thinking in the same direction and where we may not be. Let me ask you for just a second, if you don't know the people next to you, introduce yourself so that you know where you're coming from and can find somebody to chat with. If you happen to be seated so you're not next to anybody, and I don't think I see that, move so that there is somebody to talk to. But let me ask you for just a second to talk with somebody near you and determine what you think would be the absolute essential ingredients for differentiation. When I say to you, it's not just about tiered lessons, or it's not just about a piece of paper with lessons that have alternate strategies on it. What does have to be there for it to be a complete picture? What would you say are the essential elements of differentiation? And why'd you select those? You know, when you really stop to think about it, you could put so many things in that picture. Why those non-negotiables? And there's not one clear answer to this, by the way. I could talk with you on 5 separate mornings about this and say it to you 5 separate ways, so it's not like it's a recipe. But what would you say are non-negotiables of differentiation? Talk about that for just a minute, and in a couple of minutes I'm going to ask you if you can hear me to clap twice. That'll help us get back together again. Take just a minute, introduce yourself, chat about this.
All right, tell us what you've written so far, Sue Ellen.
KUDs, BDA, before, during, and after. Assessments, whether it's pre-assessments, formative, ongoing, summative, flexible classroom that is going to consist of different types of grouping, and that flexible grouping.
Going beyond.
Okay, if you can hear me, clap twice. Great. Ooh, you're very good at that. Thank you. That's very helpful. Let me give you a few ways that I find helpful to think about differentiation. These aren't so much the elements yet. These are just kind of ways of thinking about it. And what I've tried to do then after we look at the definitions is to arrange the 3 mornings around some things that I would consider to be non-negotiable elements of successful differentiation. So we'll get there. For me, I know in my own teaching, one of the things that was really important to me was to stop looking at my class as a group and start looking at them as individuals and realizing that it was not even feasible that exactly the same experience was happening for all those kids when we did something in the classroom. Really to kind of look at them with the notion that they come to us with different language backgrounds, certainly with different genders, with different degrees of security, with different past experiences in school, with different levels of self-confidence about the subject, with different peer relationships, 1,000 things that can intervene in there to affect what happens in a teaching and learning situation. And so for me, differentiation kind of begins when I actually just can make myself look eyeball to eyeball with what's really a pretty scary reality, and that is that room full of kids is different from each other. And those differences make a difference. And if I want to do the best job of teaching that I can spend a pretty good chunk of my career trying to understand those differences and respond to those differences. It's not something you do on a day. It's a commitment to say I can look harder, I can look beneath the surface, I can understand a few more things, I can peel back a little more of the surface than I've been able to do before. And to the degree that I can acknowledge and accept those differences and then start working with them as a part of my teaching plan, I'll probably do better. That for me is sort of a genesis of differentiation, I guess. And so then, for me, differentiation becomes responsive teaching rather than one-size-fits-all teaching. I've looked at the kids, I really understand that the differences they bring shape who they are. And in fact, it's actually, to me, why teaching's interesting. I'd hate to get the same set of widgets in every hour of every day for 35 years. What's so cool is that they are so different from each other, and that they do bring that element of unpredictability with them. And if I can really look at those differences and can really wrap around the fact that those differences matter, then at some point, hopefully, what I'm going to do is say to myself, you know what? When I teach, I have to respond to those differences. I can't look past them. I have to look at them, and I have to plan with them in mind. That doesn't mean that we jettison the content that we're responsible for. Clearly, we have major responsibilities for content that has important implications for kids, even if you overlook the test part. What it means is we quit just teaching content, and we become keenly aware that we have to teach content to human beings, and then in order to transfer that content so that it becomes a part of their lives, we have to teach it to individuals rather than just teach it. And I think that's a hard thing. I think it's a hard thing. I think it's hard enough to just cover the content. That seems beyond us most days because it has to happen so fast and there's so much of it. But differentiation suggests that to get it right, if all we care about is making sure that kids learn, we have to teach individuals the content, and we have to make sure that it's working for them. Differentiation, in a funny kind of way, is planning for the unpredictability of a classroom. And that sounds kind of like a paradox. If it's unpredictable, how do you plan for it? But in fact, the longer we stay in teaching, the more we know some things. We know that when we talk about this concept in science, kids inevitably get confused. It happens every year. And so we say to ourselves, okay, rather than letting the confusion creep up on me again, what I'm going to say is I know some kids are going to get behind here. It's tough. They're going to need extra explanations. I know some kids inevitably get this part backwards. And I know I've got some kids in here who are going to get ahead of me. And I've probably got some kids who are lacking background vocabulary because they are every year. So what I'm going to do is plan to make sure that vocabulary is taught before I get the kids behind on it, to have some time where I can reteach when kids need it, to go in with something that I can extend the learning with. I don't know yet who's going to need which thing, and it's certainly possible that this year there won't be anybody who's lacking the vocabulary, or there won't be anybody who learns it extra fast. But I'm going to at least plan with the possibility that somebody will finish today's lesson early, that somebody can't read the textbook, and then with that flexibility, I'm going to be able to reach out to them better. One of the key points that I hope you'll take away from what you see in many of the sessions over the next few days is what we think of as proactive differentiation. I discovered over time that almost all of us as teachers say that we differentiate instruction. You don't find too many teachers who say, heck no, I don't ever differentiate anything and I don't mean to. There are some, I've met some of them, but most of us, yeah, I reach out to kids, I do stuff to help kids. Many of us have a definition of differentiation that's sort of a reactive one. I come in and I teach the same lesson to everybody. I mean for all of us to kind of stay together. But when I realize somebody's gotten off track, I try to find time to help them. I go over and kneel down by them and try to whisper something else, or I talk with them a bit during recess, or I ask them if they can stay after school, or I try to give them something extra to help them. What we're doing in that situation is improvising help. And it always comes when we realize, whoops, that one-size-fits-all lesson plan isn't working again. Whoops, it didn't work for these 3 kids again today. And then on the spot, we kind of try to do something for kids. I'd much rather have a kid that I like in a class where somebody's improvising to help them than in a class where nobody even notices that they need help. So the improvisation's not a bad thing. It's just that it's really hard to improvise enough to help an 11th grader who can't read the science book. It's hard to improvise enough to help a kid who misunderstood all of the stuff about multiplication last year, and now you're ready to move on to other things. The pre-planning piece is what makes differentiation really robust. And so what we're hoping for is proactive differentiation. These little guys designed a bridge, kind of like we design lesson plans, and then the bridge got built. And they're looking at it, and it's just not quite what they were envisioning. And one of them says to the other one, "So much for winging it, Ed, next time we plan the bridge." What we're talking about with differentiation that's proactive is that when we improvise or overlook student differences, the kids and the content often don't connect. So what we're trying to do is plan differentiation so that we're really looking at who are we trying to connect this content to and what are the various ways we can make it connect. Differentiation's trying to avoid this, and I suspect some of you have experienced this as students, and to be honest, I would have to say that I have inflicted this as a teacher, and I presume some of the rest of you have here as well. That happens sometimes, of course, because kids are sleep deprived, but it also starts to happen, maybe not completely within 2 minutes, but when the kid realizes she's teaching me this stuff again and I've known it for 2 years, or when the kid's going, oh gosh, she's saying that same stuff I didn't understand yesterday and she's right back in the middle of it again. Or I don't even know what that word means he's talking about, and he's been talking about it for 2 days, and kids just sort of zone out when the lesson isn't a good fit for them. One of my favorite definitions of differentiation came from a little middle school kid that I was interviewing, and she said to me, she was talking to me about a class that was differentiated that she thought was really effective, and she said, "I like this class because there's something different going on all the time. My other classes, it's like peanut butter for lunch every single day. This class, it's like my teacher really knows how to cook. It's like she runs a really good restaurant with a big menu and all." And that's not a bad way of thinking about differentiation. The teacher who has several things that can happen in the classroom so that there's different routes that kids can go to get where they need to, where you have the sense that the teacher is trying to nourish everybody, but they don't all have to eat exactly the same stuff at the same time to be able to get there. This is actually the best way that I have been able to devise to this point to think about the whole big picture of differentiation. And our time is too short to really pick this apart. But it's not a bad thing to keep in front of you and to sort of ask yourself as you go through the 3 days, in this workshop where I am now, which piece of this are they talking about? Or which 2 or 3 pieces are coming together in here? Differentiation, on some level, is just a teacher who looks eyeball to eyeball with those kids' needs and tries to do something about it. Some days what we do works beautifully, some days we're a little lame, some days it doesn't quite go like we meant it to, but if we're really looking at the kids' needs and trying to reach out, we're trying to differentiate. These are things that we have to attend to. They're general principles of differentiation that we really have to attend to if it's going to work. And that's not the case because I said so or because it's written in a book someplace. It's the case because a classroom is a room full of human beings, and we all have these common sort of needs and traits. And if somebody doesn't attend to those needs and traits, we get really testy. And we can sabotage stuff pretty well when we think things aren't working right. And in addition to that, it's our job to make sure kids are learning. And if we don't attend to these things, we either compromise the learning or we compromise our partnership with kids. Really important to have what we call respectful tasks, meaning that everybody's work is equally appealing, equally thoughtful, based on important ideas, so that when kids look around, they don't have this sense, ooh, she's doing the dumb task. I know she's kind of dumb because that task looks really dumb. Oh, those 4 kids are the teacher's pet because they always get to do the cool stuff over there. What you really want is for kids to look around and see stuff where you think, you know, that looks pretty cool to do. That looks okay too, and that'd be fine with me. Look for that as you're going through the sessions today, and check it out to see how respectful the tasks seem. If you were a kid and you looked at the 2 tasks that you're being shown, or the 4 versions you're being shown, would you have some sense that one of them is clearly the preferred version, the one the teacher really meant for everybody to do, and the other stuff's just kind of spin-offs? Or does it all look pretty cool and interesting and well planned? Quality curriculum you're going to hear a lot about. You can differentiate anything, but if you differentiate something that's just immensely boring, you have just spent your time creating 4 routes to boredom. And if you do nothing but drill, you have just spent your life finding various ways to bore kids to death, or to, you know, drill their socks off without any understanding. So the notion of starting with something cool and moving from there is much more powerful than just starting with whatever and kind of trying to go someplace down that pike. Flexible grouping is very important. We're going to come back to most of these things. You don't want in a classroom to throw all kids in and kind of keep doing the same thing with them. People will say to me sometimes, you know, my principal has said that in a differentiated classroom we can't group kids, because if you put kids in groups in a differentiated classroom, you might as well have put them in separate rooms. I think that's sort of 2 ends of a continuum. Separate rooms is pretty separate. In a differentiated classroom, there are times when you do need to have 5 kids together that don't understand this math concept to really reteach that math concept, and the whole 30 kids don't need to sit there and hear it, but those 5 really do. On the other hand, there are times when you want to have kids in groups just by the fact that they can all apply fractions to a topic that they care about, whether it's music or baseball, and by applying it to music or baseball, they might get the fractions better. That's an interest-based arrangement. And sometimes you just want to say to kids, turn to somebody and check your problem and see if you agree, and it's a random arrangement. And sometimes you might want to put kids together based on how they learn. And sometimes kids need to be put together by teacher choice, and sometimes by kid choice. We don't just have 2 options with kids. Throw them all together and don't acknowledge their differences in the classroom, or put them in bluebirds, buzzards, and wombats. And what we're trying to do is make sure that they are in multiple arrangements over time to benefit their learning. Continual assessment is huge. I've had teachers say to me many times, and I'm sure I've said it, oh, I gave them the assignment based on their understanding, and I can just tell by how they look at me. Or we did a KWL in class yesterday, and as a result of the KWL, I knew which group to put them in. If it's a whole group KWL, you don't know what group to put them in, because you had 6 kids helping you fill in that chart, and the other 22 were sitting there looking at you, and you have no clue what's going on in their heads. It's, again, looking at the class as a group instead of as individuals. So that continual daily assessment, see where kids are in relation to where they need to go, is massively important. And building community is huge. We don't talk about that very much, but school is really competitive. I don't know if you've seen the articles in the paper the last few days on the huge cheating that they've found going on in several leading high schools in the country, which only means that they happen to look in those schools. If they looked in a lot of other schools, they'd find the same thing, I'm sure. It's not just those high schools. But the crux of it is kids competing against one another. Kids really feeling like, I've got to get the edge, I have to push forward, I can't make a mistake here. When you get into that competitive mode, then you kind of want to sabotage that kid next to you, and you can't take 2 seconds from your time to help somebody else with something. So really building a community where kids can breathe deeply and say, nobody else has to lose for me to win, and we can pull together as a team rather than as individuals that are cutthroat, makes the thing work much, much better. But there are a lot of things we can do here that squash that. Kids come to us with differences in their readiness to learn because of past experiences, because of second language issues, because of labeling issues. They come to us with different interests. May not care diddly squat about the subject you're teaching, but with most kids who are normal, there's something they like. There's something they're willing to invest their time in. And if we can figure out how to bring those two things together, our stuff and their stuff, we get much better motivation. So they come with personal interest. You and I can help build new interest. We can attend to existing interest, and we get further if we do. And kids come to us with differences in how they learn. Some kids learn much better sitting still. Marcia was telling me a cool story last night about a teacher who was teaching geometry to fifth graders, I think, and had the kids lying on the floor to create with their bodies the shapes that they were talking about and to determine ways that they could and couldn't move to make geometric features happen. And not surprisingly, that class remembered those things really well, as opposed to just hearing it or seeing it in the book or seeing it on the board. If you can tap into different ways of learning, more kids will go with you. And to do that, you and I can mess around with 4 or 5 elements in our classroom. We can adapt content, which is either the stuff that we teach or how kids get access to the stuff. And most of the time what we're trying to do is mess around with how kids get access. Most of the stuff needs to stay about the same most of the time. Activities, how kids come to make sense of the stuff, how they come to own it, we can adapt those. We can adapt products, which is how kids show us what they've learned. And we can adapt affect and learning environment. And all of these we can modify to address these student needs. And that's really the crux of differentiation. And then there are a lot of strategies that you're going to hear our presenters talking about. Tiered lessons is one of them. RAFs is one of them. Sternberg's intelligences is one of them. Complex instruction. A lot of wonderful strategies. And when we teach, this is what we're desperate for. This is what we want to hear about. So when we go back, we have some tools to be able to use. And those tools matter. But I don't care how wonderful a learning contract you've got if the curriculum has rickets, and if the kids feel like bluebirds, buzzards, and wombats, and if you're the king bee and the kids are sitting passively waiting for you to tell them what to do all the time, that learning contract, which looks swell on paper, is going to take a nosedive. Classrooms are perverse. They're living systems. And in a system, the big idea is every element affects every other element. And we need to keep asking ourselves, how's this element feeding the others? How's this working in sync with the others? And it's really hard, and it's also really cool because it's such a fascinating mix of things. So differentiation ultimately has a whole batch of common sense in it. It isn't really anything particularly esoteric or beyond the range of a teacher's thinking. What we're trying to do is to ensure that each kid learns what he or she needs to learn in order to succeed. And my hunch would be not just to succeed on a standardized test, but to succeed beyond that. To succeed as a learning human being, as a contributor to a community, as a person who sees their possibilities in life. It's teaching individuals rather than composites. And what we're hoping we do as teachers over time is to begin to teach that way as a way of life. I've had teachers say to me, I differentiate on Friday if we finish everything. I've had lots of teachers now, and this really surprised me the first time I heard it, and now I've heard it enough times so it's not a surprise anymore. I try really hard to differentiate in the spring after the state standards test is over. Differentiation says from day 1 to day 180. I've got places I need to take kids. If I know where they are in that journey, I'm capable of being flexible enough to push them ahead further. And that's who we are in this classroom. It's what we do, and we all work together for that. Not terribly abstract, but not terribly easy either. This is really the point of differentiation, and maybe the thing that's the most challenging for us as teachers. The little guy says, I taught Stripe how to whistle. I don't hear him whistling. I said I taught him, I didn't say he learned it. And it's easy for us to feel that way now. My job is to cover the stuff. I kind of know they're not all learning it because, for heaven's sakes, I have too much to cover and I have to do it too fast. But our job's not to cover it, it's to teach it. And differentiation suggests we teach it better if we can know where kids are and plan to take them with us. So what we're going to do for a little bit here is to take a look at some examples of differentiation, both positive and some that aren't quite as good as some others, because all of us are somewhere in a journey and none of us are finished yet. We're going to look at some classroom scenarios, probably before we finish at some videos. And what we're going to do is let them help us analyze the big principles of differentiation. So again, you have some sense of what the big elements are that you're looking at to be able to plug in the other things that you see for a second. So let me ask you for just a second, to go back now with some folks next to you. And this time, instead of looking at the elements necessarily, although you can do that if you want to, talk for just a minute about your definition of differentiation. Is it similar to some of what's up here? How would you explain it to a parent, a colleague, a kid? What would you tell them you're up to with differentiation? What are you trying to accomplish? So in other words, how does your definition match the ones that I gave you? How's it different from that? And if you want to revisit it, how do your elements match that little flow chart that I just showed you a few minutes ago? Your non-negotiable elements, are they matching the ones there or not? Take just a minute and talk about that. Stand up if you need to for a second.
The only thing we did leave out, though, were respectful tasks, and that is truly important. But we had come up with
You had it all.
the different tasks.
As this first video ends, we invite you to think about your own definition of differentiation and how its components compare with the non-negotiable elements presented by Dr. Tomlinson. In the next video, Dr. Tomlinson will continue her discussion of the big ideas of differentiation as she discusses how connecting with students is an essential prerequisite to a differentiated approach.